This afternoon's event. It has been an incredible year for our congregation. Our very first service in this space was on Palm Sunday, and we had our grand opening with our partners from True Ground on April 15th. And at that event, Nina had a wonderful idea. She said, there are so many congregations interested in this type of a project. Could you host an event? And I said, of course, we'd be glad to. And I'm so grateful that Nina had the right folks to talk to actually now have two other events that have already happened throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So you all are among good company here in Virginia of other folks who are interested in using their resources to benefit this world. So in case this is your first time in our space, I want to make sure that you know how to find the restrooms if you need them at any point. You just go through the doors in the rear of the sanctuary, make a left, and then one more left, and you'll see the sign for the restrooms. At the end of all of the presentations today, we're going to offer tours of our space. It'll include the church space, Kinhaven school space, and also the residential space. So we're going to offer two different tours immediately after the presentations end, and then also we'll have a second tour for those who want to spend some time at the expo in the fellowship hall first. So that is all I have to offer to you besides a warm welcome. Nina?
It was such an honor to be part of that celebration this spring. This was one of the projects I worked on before I retired from True Ground, Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. And to see everyone here to come celebrate this amazing accomplishment. And by no means is this an easy journey. So warning, you'll hear a lot about hard journeys. But it's also an exciting journey, and it's wonderful to see churches use their land and property for more mission. So I'm going to start by just telling you, since I retired, I have become very engaged with an Episcopal organization called Virginia Episcopal Real Estate Partners. We were founded in 1959 as Virginia Diocesan Homes, but we've rebranded because we see there's a great need for congregations to go through this journey of the discernment and development for what to do to enhance the mission of their facilities. So our focus is discipleship, community impact, and financial stability. And we encourage those of you that are in judicatories to think about how you work together and learn from each other, because there's so much in this space. And as you'll see today, there's so much talent. Right now, we're working with a few churches around the state: Christ Ascension in Richmond, Iglesia Santa Maria in Falls Church, Trinity Church in Arlington, right here on Columbia Pike. And we also created an advisor network, and happy to share that with anybody. We put out an RFP last year and asked a bunch of developers and consultants, would they be willing to work with congregations? So we've got that database and their responses. So let us know if you want to share that, even non-Episcopalians. And as we start this conversation, I just want to talk about why. Why is mission real estate important, other than loving your neighbor as yourself, right? That's such a Christian principle, and I know we welcome all faiths, but for those of you that have the Christian path, and to act justly and love mercy. Like, how can we all be worried less? I have talked to so many priests who are worried about their roof, who are worried about, the repairs they need on their building, and they're not able to spend the time and energy on how to act justly and love mercy. So your real estate is this buried treasure, as we like to say. It comes from the parable of the talents, something that could do more for the community. So we want this workshop, which is part of our mission, to partner with, and I'll introduce in a minute, the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, our co-sponsor for these events. But the purpose for this workshop, we wanted to share with you some of the things we've learned about mission real estate. And number one, it's very important to think about discernment. Why are you doing this? So what's that process? So that'll be our first panel after we have our introductory speakers talking about resources. Second is development. We actually have a couple folks, developers and their church partners, to talk to you about that journey. And then operations. This isn't a one-time event. This is a partnership for a long period of time. And a couple logistic things. We will send everyone who signed up here a copy of this PowerPoint. So don't feel like you have to take photographs of every slide. And we are also filming this event. So this is something that we hope to put up on our website, VREP's website, as well as the Virginia Interfaith Center. And I think that's all I have to share at this time. I'll come back for the development panel, but I'm really honored to introduce Lakeisha Cook, who is the co-executive director of the Virginia Interfaith Center and our co-sponsor.
Good afternoon. It is so wonderful to be here with you on this afternoon as we are here talking about the important issue of housing. But as we're about to talk about housing, let me first acknowledge the land on which we stand and sit. We acknowledge the original stewards of this land, who were the Acostan and the Piscataway people, who took care and stewarded this land, and we're so grateful for their toil, and we acknowledge them in this space. I am here representing Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. We are really excited to be in partnership with Virginia Episcopal Real Estate Partners and sponsoring these workshops all throughout the Commonwealth. And we are very grateful for the leadership and staff of Central United Methodist Church, grateful for their hospitality and grateful for them hosting us in this space today. Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy is a nonpartisan coalition of over 25,000 members, and it is the largest statewide advocacy voice for the interfaith community in Virginia. We engage people of faith and goodwill in advocating for racial, social, and economic justice in Virginia's policies and practices through education, prayer, and action. We are known in Virginia for several different things. Known first for our effective advocacy. We win real improvements for people in Virginia. We are focused on fighting for justice for all Virginians so that all Virginians can thrive in the communities that they live in. We recognize that justice is not a solitary act, but a communal pursuit. We have proudly assisted in bringing the interfaith voices from around the Commonwealth and assisted in securing victories such as the expansion of Medicaid and the abolition of the death penalty, making Virginia the first state in the South to abolish the death penalty. Our work has real-life consequences, and there's no way we could accomplish it without the hard work of the base, which is the people of faith and goodwill in the Commonwealth, which leads us to our next strength, which is our diversity. Our base reflects the beautiful diversity of Virginia. We have people of different faiths, ages, and backgrounds involved in the work of justice. Another strength of ours is the way in which we work in a bipartisan way. In a season where there is so much division, we celebrate our ability to bring people together united in a fight for justice. Our work doesn't just unify those in our base, but it also becomes an opportunity to unite our legislators across the aisle. Many of our bills that we help to support intentionally have both Democratic and Republican patrons, and most of our bills have bipartisan support. And that is not an easy feat in 2024. Another one of our strengths is our civic engagement work. Our civic engagement work includes recruiting congregations that will commit to be 100% voting congregations, and that continues to expand each year that we do it. But we also strive to ensure that every voice is heard in Virginia's decision-making process. Just this weekend, on Sunday, in Richmond, we hosted 3 Souls to the Polls event simultaneously, but we were able to give out 600 fish fry meals to people who came and early voted. We've already seen the numbers come back from our efforts, and we have already doubled the number of people who voted on Sunday last year in Richmond. We do good work, and we work in several policy buckets. The policy buckets that we work in are affordable housing, criminal justice reform, health equity, and we also work in working family supports. We educate the people of Virginia so that they're able to advocate for good policy. We take away the ambiguity that sometimes is there when people don't know how to engage the people they have elected and put into office, holding these people accountable to represent those things that we hold value to. So these are the buckets that we work in, and as I've already mentioned, we work in one of the buckets is our affordable housing work. Our housing work, in addition to providing educational moments like we are in this afternoon, we also advocate policy in the area of increasing funding for affordable housing, tenant protections, and making it easier for congregations who are seeking to build affordable housing. Faith communities are uniquely positioned in the fight for affordable housing because many times when members of our community are struggling to either secure housing or pay their rent or need assistance with utilities, congregations are the first places that they reach out to. Sadly, churches continue to close every week, and many are struggling to pivot coming off the pandemic. So with dwindling attendance, aging memberships, there is an opportunity to reimagine that what can be done with buildings and land owned by congregations throughout the Commonwealth. And we are excited about the resources and the wisdom that will be shared with you on today. So again, thank you so much for coming. We do have a table that is in the exhibit area, the expo, so please make sure you stop by our table so that you can stay connected with our work. So now it is my pleasure to be able to introduce our next speaker. We're going to welcome Jill Norcross, and she is from the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Association.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here today. My name is Jill Norcross. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. We have a changed mission because we have recently merged with the Alliance for Housing Solutions. So for those of you who are from Arlington, Virginia, you know that this organization has been a really long-term partner in our work in advocacy. So it's been an honor to work with my colleague Alice Hogan, who's here today as now the Navajo Director for Arlington. And I'm also pleased to welcome Amanda Corin, who's now our Navajo Director in Loudoun County. So we're expanding our staff, we're expanding our team, and our mission is to increase the supply of and equitable access to affordable housing in Northern Virginia through education, advocacy, and community partnership. And I do want to just underline the community partnership piece because we know that faith-based affordable housing development really takes partners. And I think you're going to learn and hear from a lot of the partners today who have gone through this journey before, who are here for you if you have questions, if you've had concerns, if you need answers. It's an amazing group of people. In my past life, I served as a consultant to many of the faith communities here in Northern Virginia who've gone down this path. It's been such a rewarding experience to see people think beyond themselves, even beyond their own congregations and communities. But I do want to talk a little bit about the importance of advocacy in affordable housing and how our faith communities really have stepped up and stood out as some of the best advocates, especially those of you who have gone ahead and developed affordable housing on your property. When we talk about the advocate's role, I think it's important, and we know as the community of faith, that we tie it to human services. We understand the need for stable housing with services is critical in our community. Personally, I think we need to use our voice to support permanent supportive housing solutions. So that's housing for our really most vulnerable residents in our community. And I think our faith leaders really can help us with that. I'm excited because I think, unfortunately, this housing crisis really has brought the opportunity to kind of share new messages about why housing is important. So we can talk about how affordable housing really is economic development here in Northern Virginia and across the state, and how our local resources, our local governments that are contributing tax revenue for affordable housing is really an investment in our communities and something that's needed. And that job growth and our economic growth here requires housing at all affordability levels. I think if you talk to a lot of our elected officials, they'll tell you when they talk to potential businesses and companies who are looking to relocate to Northern Virginia, they have concerns about the availability for housing supply and housing rents and sale price for those across their workforce. So I think when we are reaching out, we have a very bipartisan friendly message that we do need housing supply and affordability. So I really appreciate our advocates that can kind of help share that message as well. We know, and we've done, and Arlington and Alexandria especially have done a lot of hard work around policy, land use, and zoning. I think it's important that our advocacy continue to hammer home the importance of zoning reform as a racial justice issue. It's a social justice issue. And so I really applaud all of you who have worked so hard to lift that up in our communities and continue to do so. We've seen that parking reductions can really benefit our affordable housing providers as well. We know that many people who live in affordable housing aren't able to pay their rent in addition to own their own car. So making the case for reduced parking reductions also brings down the cost. We know that digging the garage under this building was an extreme cost, as we know. And so if we can continue to advocate for those policy changes and solutions, we lift that up too. And I also want to recognize and applaud your efforts to speak up. When we go before our local governments during budget season, when we go before our local governments to say, yes, we need this housing in our backyard, the faith community partnerships through Voice and others really are there with us every step of the way. So I really just want to thank you and encourage you, if you do not have your own land or resources, you do have your voice in your faith community. People are listening, our elected officials are listening to you, and we really need you to kind of join us in this fight here locally and then, of course, at the statewide level. And we really want to lift up the incredible work of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, our other statewide housing partners, of course, VREP, thank you for having us, and CUMC. It's really an incredible pleasure to see this vision of yours be realized in a beautiful, beautiful space. So please keep in touch with us. We are here. We offer free lunch and learn programming if you have questions about affordable housing on a monthly basis. We're covering a topic related to affordable housing. It can be a great 101 introduction for your congregation if they have questions about affordable housing, how it's designed, how it's developed, how we're reaching those who most need it. We also have a monthly Housing in Action newsletter where we try to publish everything that's happening in the 5 jurisdictions in Northern Virginia, opportunities for advocacy and policy reform. And we also have a Rising Housing Leaders program, so if there are younger people in your congregations or in your companies who want to learn more about affordable housing, we offer scholarships to conferences. We offer training opportunities for them as well to kind of build a stronger next generation network of the leaders who are going to help us solve the housing crisis. So again, thank you for having me. I look forward to moderating one of the panels on discernment, and it's a pleasure. And now I'd like to welcome my friend and affordable housing champion, Helen McElvain with the City of Alexandria.
So thank you to Central United Methodist for hosting us. Your sanctuary is beautiful. I'd also like to thank VREP, the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, Virginia Housing, and of course, Navaja. And I always take a moment to pause and start with a photo of people who have been helped with affordable housing, because I think we all love to see the real estate, the glossy building photos, but this is our why, whether you are a government, a public servant or employee, or a church that's looking for what's next for us, or just a neighbor who's concerned about others. It's the people, and it's sort of why we do what we do. And you know what? How do I advance the slides? Oh, very good. Okay. Magic. Oh, thank you very much, and I'm glad I brought the paper too. So I start with our 2013 Housing Master Plan. The city was the first in our region to do one of these, and it has been our roadmap for how the city creates housing policies, invests in housing, and does development with partners. And so we came up with some things that sound very simple, but really are inspiring every day to us, including that housing should be for all people, that we should have housings for people at all incomes, life stages, and abilities, that we should have a distribution of housing citywide, and we should strive for mixed income neighborhoods and buildings when it's possible, communities, and that we should locate our housing whenever possible in neighborhoods with access to transit, jobs, services, and amenities. So the Housing Master Plan target was to create 2,000 committed affordable units. And remember that number, 2,000, because I'll refer to it in a minute. And then just a few years ago, the city participated in a regional group, and all 22 jurisdictions that belong to the Council of Governments agreed that we should work together to create more housing, pretty much based on the need for economic development and to be competitive, but also because housing is honestly a regional issue. And for the city, that meant that we would commit to an additional 2,250 units. So our collective number by 2030 is 4,250. And then I would say another significant thing for the city is that in 2021, with very little fanfare and no complaints, the city adopted an all-Alexandria resolution. And it expressed, one, the city's regret at having participated in racial discrimination and its permutations across our housing market, our criminal justice system, our access to capital, our educational system. We were among the last places in Virginia to integrate. And it expressed our commitment to racial and social equity. So while that was not said explicitly in 2013, it certainly was woven through our housing master plan, and it's a very intentional part of what we're doing now as we update our housing master plan and are working on a project we call Housing 2040. So our housing master plan also included a call to faith communities to participate in the creation of affordable housing. And I think that's consistent with our shared desire to repair the world. And faith communities were a very good audience. And that's because they own land. And in the city, at the time we came up with this, it was 126 acres, just waiting to be developed. You are, of course, and someone alluded to this earlier, are familiar with need from your work in the community. Housing is one of the greatest drivers of people's inability to eat healthfully, have good child care, have resources for their health. There's a lot of synergy with your mission, and you're very focused on eternal things and perpetual affordable housing. And you're located in every neighborhood. So you help to make sure that we achieve that goal of geographic distribution. And the other thing that we found is that faith communities are really evolving. And their desire to be part of a social mission in the world is much greater than it probably has ever been so articulated. So I'll talk to you today about Alexandria's experience with faith-based development. So far, we've had 5 churches work on affordable housing in the city. One is beginning that journey. These 5 churches are going to contribute over 550 affordable housing units. And so it is the churches that are helping our housing master plan target and our regional target stay on track. That does not include our housing authority, which acquired a property called Pendleton Park Apartments right next to the Braddock Metro that was developed about 50 years ago by Third Baptist Church. So there have always been congregations involved in this work quietly, and for many of them back 40, 50, 60 years ago, they were using HUD products that were available, because at that time they saw a need that has only grown. I'm very pleased to say that in Alexandria, all 5 churches are still operating. That is not always the case. And we have ongoing interest from many denominations. We have 4 churches that are actively discerning if this is the right way to go, and our first groups that aren't Christian churches. And I'm sure at least 2 of them are going to move forward. So 4 of our churches selected a nonprofit development partner to work with, and 1 created its own nonprofit to develop and operate the project. And I will say their nonprofit received a lot of technical and financial support from the city. The guy that's currently my development director, I think, spent 2 years on the site, but also from Virginia Housing and from other funders to get them through. But since it opened, it's been full, and it's operated very smoothly. So, projects never look as good as they do on the day you first think of them, and then after they're leased up, they look good again. So it's looking good again. And besides technical assistance, and by technical assistance I mean some things that aren't very technical, like introducing churches and congregations to other churches that have done this before, whether they've decided to move forward or not. But we also may introduce them to, our planning and zoning colleagues. Sometimes the biggest barrier for a church to go forward is, what will parking look like? How will they figure out the traffic pattern? So we're very glad to be sort of the entryway to what the city bureaucracy, but what we hope are really lots of resources to help churches and faith communities. And then, of course, we're involved as a permanent funder for many projects. So I have 5 photos, and we'll just go through these quickly. So the first is Beasley Square, and this was done by Shiloh Baptist Church and Harambe, a nonprofit they formed. I will say this is the city's only experience with real NIMBYism. Some of the churches here might disagree. But it was proposed to be 18 senior units. It was in a part of Old Town where affordable housing was looked at with lots of pearl clutching. And by the time it finished, it was down to 8 senior units. And I hope they're making good trouble. But at any rate, that was, I have to say, we have a community and elected leaders who are very, very supportive. The next one is St. James Plaza, which was developed by St. James United Methodist Church and AHC. The next one is the Spire, which is Church of the Resurrection, also AHC as its nonprofit developer. And these 2 projects, St. James and Church of the Spire, Church of the Resurrection, are literally on the same street with Beauregard in between. Both have moved into smaller sanctuaries, but are going strong. And this next to last photo, is the Waypoint at Fairlington, which is Fairlington Presbyterian and Wesley Housing. And that's our newest. It opened about a year and a half ago. So, and then the last photo is a project called Old Town West. It is owned by Alfred Street Baptist Church. They actually bought this affordable housing when they were going to make their own church bigger. I used a little bit of my residual Catholic, make someone feel very guilty by saying, surely you're not going to just tear this down when the affordability expires. So they have 75 townhomes and plan to build back 3 or 4 times that amount under a new zoning tool the city has developed to preserve housing. So I like to, when I work with faith communities, I sort of like to talk about what I call the D's of when you're going to be successful. And We really like to be the first call. I was on a conference call recently where, this is a big trend and some of the governments are sort of overwhelmed. And I said, we like it when people call us and have great ideas. But it is good if you've done some pre-work. So discernment, which I know you will be talking about, and what are we sort of called to do? Knowing the development potential of your land, what can we do? Knowing about how your faith community makes decisions, who decides about the use of land and types of projects, deputizing a steering committee, and these may be people, they don't all have to have a background in construction, but they're the leaders of the congregation, whether formal or informal, and communicators about the project, both to your congregation and to the locality. It's very important to delegate lots of day-to-day stuff, and most of the decisions, I've seen faith communities get tripped up when they have to move along congregationally, and big decisions or small decisions, everybody has got to be involved. That can be hard. Who will the development partners be? And someone has already said, it's a long-term relationship, and it is. So picking groups, nonprofit partners who share your values and act with integrity, I think, is especially important for a faith community. And then, of course, the development agreement, because at the end of the day, you've got to commit things to paper. And I think here I've stressed having attorneys, because I think sometimes a church sometimes will trust too much, and interests aren't always aligned all the way through. So I think it's a healthy thing to have an attorney advising the faith community. So, and then just quickly, what are the challenges I've seen in working with faith communities? I think the biggest one is making sure that everybody feels they've been brought along, keeping your congregation informed, engaged, and supportive. There are so many challenges along the way, and there's a lot of time. So I think making sure that you keep everybody informed and feeling like they're really important to the project's success. Understanding the time and cost of the development approval process, as well as project funding. Affordable housing is a real alphabet soup of funding sources and competition and some things that don't feel like what you probably wanted to be involved in, but it's all sort of part of this process. I think also, managing risk, relocation of your services if you plan to move forward, and then managing everyone's expectations, because change is a very hard thing. Even sometimes when people are supportive of change, the process itself can be hard. And then I think, NIMBYism, and we're all about loving our neighbors, but it's sometimes hard when they're coming to public meetings and saying terrible things about your project. So I think this is, it's a challenge for faith communities. And to this, I know a lot of congregations and advocates are involved in this faith and housing proposal, legislative proposal, and I will say, I've sort of said to some who are talking about it that, it's still important, I think, to get that development approval so that everyone feels that, the process has been fair and the issues of the community have been looked at. I'm not against the legislation, but I think that having some kind of a process, a more streamlined process, but that allows a church or a faith community to continue knowing that the jurisdiction supports it is very important. And then what I call the afterlife, because after the project is over, you've got to have a plan for that too. And you've landed in your new building, you're back, and you've sort of survived this. So I look forward to being with you today and appreciate your attention. And if you just go, so I just want to point out that picture in the middle below is when we took sledgehammers AHC did not want to do a regular groundbreaking. So we took sledgehammers to the district office, not to the church. So. But people really liked it.
We are very grateful for the financial support of Virginia Housing, and Kanisha Brown is our Regional Director for Northern Virginia, so happy to introduce her.
Oh, next slide. Thought I updated that. Hi, everyone. So I have quite the deck to get through, and I'm going to try to breeze through it, but hit the kind of high level. So today I'm going to just talk about briefly Virginia Housing for those who are unfamiliar with us, our organization, a quick rundown of the services we provide and resources, and then how we continue to partner with faith-based organizations. Next slide. So our mission at Virginia Housing is to help Virginians attain quality, affordable housing. We receive no tax dollars. We work in partnership with public and private sector to build programs and communities that basically transform the way Virginians live their lives and their access to housing. Next slide. So our organization is structured with 3 primary departments. That's rental housing, homeownership, and community outreach division. And while some of that may be very intuitive of what rental housing and homeownership does, I do want to spend a little more time on our community outreach division and what we kind of do, which is really where you see a lot of the partnerships with faith-based organizations begin. We have a variety of different partnerships. We partner with local governments, nonprofits, supportive housing organizations, public housing authorities, and of course, faith-based organizations. Next slide. We are actually starting a new strategic plan, but just to brief you on some of our original strategic plan goals, of course, addressing the state housing needs, addressing unmet rental needs for low-income housing, strengthening homeownership programs for first home buyers, and then, of course, delivering superior long-term financial and operating performances. Next slide. Okay, so while Virginia Housing is based in Richmond, Virginia, the organization decided to expand its presence to Northern Virginia some years ago because this market is very unique, and so they wanted to be able to make sure that they were able to seize the uniqueness of this area and understand its challenges as it relates to revitalization projects. Next slide. Okay, so quickly, I'm going to get into community outreach and what we do because, again, it's not as straightforward as rental housing. Next. Okay, so our community outreach efforts are centered around guiding partners to the appropriate Virginia housing resource, which can be tricky. My team does do what we call brain trust sessions, and that's where we sit down, we hear your ideas, and then we kind of gather and give some input on what resource may be best to try to get you to the finish line or even get the wheels started. We support, of course, our housing planning and project development activities, participate in stakeholder meetings. We also promote Virginia Housing, of course, at conferences and events, and then we connect our partners to other agency resources, which I think is very important because sometimes we're not always able to help. But what we can do is provide the contact or information of resources that may be able to help. Next slide. Okay, so we do a couple of events that I think will be really crucial to your understanding and more in-depth of Virginia Housing. One is our community impact session, and this is what we call the road show. And it's a series of events that we have that's centered around what we are, what we do, what kind of resources we have, and it really digs more in depth. And this happens once a year at multiple locations. Then we have our Community Resource Connection series, which those are 2 kind of tongue twisters, but they're very different. So the Resource Connection series focus on topical areas. So we had one recently on public housing authorities and private-public partnerships. So it's really based on what kind of topic we hear that our partners want to hear more information on, and we pull from other agencies as well as our own kind of expertise. Next slide. So now just to get into those specific resources that will be applicable to some of the faith-based projects and what you guys do, but first I'm going to talk on how we do what we do. So before I said, we don't use tax dollars. So we use a acronym, will REACH funds, and REACH stands for Resources Enabling Affordable Community Housing in Virginia. And this is basically our own generated fund, utilizing our own internal generated revenue that we put into this REACH fund. And it does a lot of great things that branch across those three departments. So workforce housing and low-income rental, we do grants, we do counseling, we have funds for making homes more accessible, helping nonprofit partners increase their capacity, and so much more. Next slide. So just to get into the specific products that those REACH funds actually fund. So we have a community building grant, a capacity building grant, and this helps like organizations to build their capacity. We also have housing counseling and educational grants. We have community impact grants, which I think this is where we've seen a lot of our partnerships start with faith-based organizations. So we have specific funds, and I'll get a little bit more into this into the next slide, but specific funds for that due diligence. So that starting off, getting an AE to come in if you have an existing building and you want to have an assessment done on it, you're trying to figure out what you can do, what's feasible. We see a lot of faith-based organizations come in to utilize these funds. Next slide. So then, of course, we have our pre-development funds, which is also a very utilized resource. And this is for, again, those kind of due diligence activities, the beginning of a development project where you're still kind of figuring everything out. And these cover kind of your engineering services, marketed studies, environmental reports, surveying, permit fees, appraisals, and it is a 0% interest for the first 36 months. Next slide. Okay, so this is the one I really wanted to spend some time on. So there are three things that we really try to emphasize when it comes to Virginia housing and how we partner with faith-based organizations. One is to educate. The second is to support, cha-ching. And the third is to connect. So educate is going back to those initial kind of resources where if there is a topic in particular that maybe a group of partners want to know about, like if you're kind of understanding how do I get a project started, how do I get through the planning phase, those are things that we could do a topical-based kind of connection, resource connection series on. And then to support, of course, going back to those kind of finances and grants. So we have these project planning grants, and that kind of helps with your AE assessment. So kind of the beginning of your project, if you have something existing, if you don't, kind of getting a site plan together, impact study, feasibility studies, and then lastly, to connect. So as I said before, we don't always have the resources for everyone's project. But even more so, what we do have is social capital. So we are everyone's best friend. So that allows us to be able to say, hey, well, if you want to do some type of supportive housing, if you want to do, if we don't have the resources for you, here is a partner that we could connect you with that does have the resource, or here is an organization that specializes in this specific type of project. So I think the social capital on top of the planning grants is really where our bread and butter is when it comes to our faith-based partnerships. Next slide. So another thing that we try to do is not to just kind of talk about what we have for development resources, but also to connect with your congregations. So one of the things that we've done in the past, if we had a dual kind of session, the first half will be someone from community outreach talking about the grants and, of course, the development side. But then the next will be someone from home ownership talking about home ownership and really connecting with their congregations that may want to be first home buyers, or we even have, some resources for second home buyers. So this kind of gives a rundown of the impact I think that my team has made with being a conduit of information down to the Richmond team. At first, we really wanted them to understand how housing prices have risen in this market, and to really make sure that they can address that in some way. So they did change the threshold for the housing market, for our loans up here. Next slide. Okay, just quickly to touch on our rental division. So it's pretty obvious what rental does. Of course, we administer low-income tax credits, and we finance development projects. But I wanted to specifically talk about one of our little niche departments. It's a sub-department in rental that I have seen a lot of partnership with faith-based organizations. Next slide. and that is our champions of our strategic market team. And so they really help with financing, especially the construction phases, for projects that are targeted towards helping with supportive housing, transitional housing, even if you have just some type of mission-based that's outside of like your normal kind of renters, but more philanthropy work. We've seen them really look at it case by case and are able to pull some funds to really make a project move forward. Next slide. So just to break down, if you don't remember anything of my presentation today, I really want to emphasize how we interact and when we come in to play a role in a project. So we all know that projects can take on a multitude of phases. It's not just these simple 5, but I think just to keep it simple, these simple 5s kind of do the trick. So we come in, of course, pre-development, so that initial part of the project, okay, you're figuring things out, you're figuring out your requirements, your program, your feasibility of a project. We can come in with grant financing to help with that. Then also design. Depending on the project, you may, if it's a low income tax credit, rental may be involved a bit with that. They do have their own design standards because we do want to make sure that all the projects that we are part of are quality, affordable housing. But then we also have community impact grants for community outreach, residential outreach, those type of activities. Procurement, we don't really have anything for that. But we come back in, if you do have our financing, during the construction phase, we have a team that will come out and do some inspections, making sure everything is going smoothly. And then at the end, of course, if there is a home ownership opportunity, our home ownership division could come in for mortgage and support. We also have first home buyer training and counseling programs. And then also our community outreach does ribbon cuttings and sponsorship events. Next slide. So this is my lovely team's contact. We will be at the expo. We have a table. So if you guys are interested in connecting, we would love to sit down and discuss this a little bit more. I know I fast talked this whole presentation, but I had limited time. So please bear with me with that. But thank you so much. And I hope to see you guys at the table.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm going to go ahead and welcome our first panel today. This is a panel that we're going to be talking about discernment. So let me just give everybody a minute to come up and join us again. Sure. I know.
My new hip.
Wonderful. Welcome. We get the fun part, we get the hard part, I think, to talk about discernment for our congregations and deciding how to do this. And we know that faith communities really have always played a role in meeting unmet needs in our societies. We have such an incredible tradition here in our country, really, where faith communities have stepped in to provide hospitals, faith communities have stepped up to provide schools and education, and now really the issue of our time is affordable housing. So really grateful to have all of you here with us to talk about how your faith community discerned the opportunity to kind of lean in many, many difficult ways to solve the affordable housing challenges. So I'm thrilled to welcome our panelists today. So we have the Reverend Joe Belzer, who's the rector of the Church of the Resurrection in Alexandria. We have Dr. Philip Faig, who's senior pastor at Old Town Community Church in Alexandria. And we have Jean Cross, the CUMC leader, lay leader here. Jean, congratulations again on this wonderful, beautiful, amazing property that I know you've worked so hard. So I'm going to go ahead and give you all about 5 minutes to tell a little bit of your story, and then we have some questions for you at the end, but I'll turn it over to you, Reverend Joe.
Okay. So I was hanging out, volunteering at an Episcopal church in the West End of Alexandria in 2012, right after I was ordained to the diaconate, and then later that year to the priesthood. I was job hunting. I was just there while I was job hunting. And the church was between rectors, between pastors, and they were deciding whether they were going to continue to hunt for a priest or whether they were going to do something else, okay? And what happened was the leadership of the church decided to halt their search for a new rector, a new priest, and spend a year discerning what their future should be. And they asked me if I would be their priest, which was interesting because I had told our bishop and them when I started hanging out there, I could not and would not, be their priest. So they went behind my back to the bishop and asked him for permission to get around that little clause. And then they came to me and suggested I be their priest, which I think was accidentally quite a good idea because being so new, I had to do my own discernment on whether that was something I could do. And with the church name Resurrection, I thought, maybe there's something here. And then people started coming up to me one at a time privately saying things like, I don't know what happened, but I began fill in the blank, began praying more, and suddenly I think I should spend more time at church. Or I don't know what happened. I was against this affordable housing project in my next to my house, but somehow I think we're being called to do something like that. I'm like, what? So anyway, it was kind of easy for me to think there was life in this church. That would be good to be involved with them as they discerned whether or not they should continue as a church or just declare success and say, we've done everything God has wanted us to do. I see some nodding out here from some of you who've been through this, right? And one of the other things that we accidentally kind of did well from the very start was we said, okay, you're new here. It's probably not a good idea for you to come in and say, I think you should tear down your church and do something else. Because there might be a lot of people who disagree with that idea. Okay? So we chose some leaders who were really, really talented. We have fortunate to have a whole bunch of those, and you all do too. And said, okay, you be the ones that go lead a discernment effort, and we'll give you all of 2013 to do that, okay? And you spend the whole year doing it. Don't just try to do it overnight. And listen to all ideas from all the people in our congregation and explore all of those ideas. And don't just come in and say, we want to build affordable housing, because surely that will save us. Although we went around that whole year saying, please, won't you save us? Won't you save us? Won't you save us? And basically, what happened at the end of that year was most of the people were convinced that we should at least explore it. So that's our discernment story, at least for the first year. Okay? I will also flip to the end of our process and say one of the things that many, many, many people, if not most people in our church, told me then and tell me now they learned through the whole 8-year process of completing our project was that God provides every single thing needed to do what God is calling you to do. And if you just skip the discernment step, you're going to get it wrong. So that's my discernment story. Your turn.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Do you want to go ahead? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dr. Fake. Yeah. You might have to.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, hi, my name's Phil. Thank you for not calling me Dr. Phil, although that happens a lot in my congregation. So I want to tell you about a program we've developed that's in the space that can help guide your congregation through the journey of discernment without necessarily a bias of where it ends up. But I'm the senior pastor of Old Town Community Church in the heart of Old Town. And about 9 years ago, we went on a journey. We have about 50,000 square feet. Half of it we weren't using, and actually really more than half of it, right? I kept telling our leaders we have the highest price storage facility in Northern Virginia because, as you know, churches acquire a lot of stuff. And so we went on this journey of discernment. We actually considered affordable housing for a variety of reasons that didn't work out for us. But one of the things our congregation recognized is that we we own our bricks and mortar, and we want to use our bricks and mortar to grow goodness in Alexandria. And so we adopted this idea that we're going to at least give over half of our square footage for goodness to grow. So we created this community hub, and in this community hub we have 9 now recovery groups that meet there. We have a hot breakfast program that feeds the hungry, some of whom are unsheltered. We have a little hub pop-up grocery store for Alive, which is a fantastic organization in Alexandria. And we have a nonprofit center. And we started a nonprofit center called The Common Good because our idea there was let's do whatever we can to help the most good happen. And if we can offer gathering space, office space, training space, all that, at way below market rates, then all those organizations could invest more of their overhead into their mission. And so we went on that journey of discernment, and it has been just an amazing ride for us. One of the things we noticed along the way is that while we were really engaging and turning out toward our community, which I know this is not the typical story, but COVID actually was a growth season for us because all of our feeding ministries and we had to put them out on the streets, just like the restaurants. And people started seeing more of what we were doing. And so that was a really interesting thing for us. But and we opened a little sooner for the recovery groups, and then they told other recovery group leaders, and so that just multiplied for us. So anyway, as we started thinking, what happened when we turned toward the community in a pretty intentional way is our congregation started experiencing renewal. And so it just, I know that's not the story for a lot of congregations, but that was our story. And so as we started looking back a little bit, we thought, okay, there might be some energy here that we want to capture. So we wrote a grant to Lilly Endowment, and we received a grant for $1.25 million to create this program called Building for Hope. And it's a discernment journey that can help congregations go through a focused way of deciding what they can do to reach their community. And I know many of the congregations that go through Building for Hope will indeed choose affordable housing, which is just wonderful and is what we hope for. I'm way off my slide, so just it happens every Sunday, so don't, but what we're trying to do with, I know I'm on a time limit here, so what we're trying to do with Building for Hope is create a movement of churches that will take their underutilized facilities, turn them into a place of goodness in their community for the purpose of revitalizing their mission. And through this, it's a 2-year cohort-based journey. And we have some wonderful partners. One, I think you're going to book from Rooted Good. Did I see that right? So one of them is Rooted Good, which has been a fantastic partner for us. Another is Center for Healthy Churches that provides coaches for clergy. But in Building for Hope, what we hope to do is help a congregation find that convergence between their assets, in other words, what they have, their passion, and a powerful need in the community for the purpose of creating a social enterprise that will meet a community need, ignite the church's passion, and provide financial resources to sustain that new social enterprise and the facility that houses it. So in a nutshell, that's Building for Hope. Last thing I'll say is that the grant from Lilly provides all the funding for the cohort journey. So we have our first cohort is full. We just got the grant in July. It has taken off. We have churches from East Coast to West Coast, multiple denominations engaging this time of discernment. And so Lilly provides all the funding for it, the coaches, the hotels, the food, everything except travel to Alexandria. We'll even provide parking in Alexandria, Old Town. which is not a small part of that grant. So anyway, thank you. I'll stop there. If I can stay for a bit of the expo. If you'd like to talk about Building for Hope, you can catch me right after we dismiss. That'd be wonderful.
Thank you. That's amazing. So Jean, thank you. That's really so interesting. And again, discernment's the hardest part. So any sort of support in peer learning is incredible. So Jean, if you could just tell us a little bit about your discernment journey here.
Thanks. My wife tells me at my age that I can't talk without notes and keep it brief, so it's one of those things. I will tell you that this will be, for whatever you choose to do, is going to be an evolutionary process. You won't necessarily get it right the first time, but by the time you get to the end, it'll be what you need to do. The journey itself, I'll tell you 3 points that if you remember nothing else about what I've got to say, remember these 3 things. Identify where you are, so you know what you're starting from. Identify where you want to go through the discernment process. And I can tell you that everybody's route will be different. No 2 people are going to do it the same way. You're going to get there by whatever means is appropriate for you. For Central, this process started probably in 2005. The building process is a little later than that, as Alex will have on one of the slides in a minute. And we recognized that the church needed to do something different. We needed to get outside the church. We needed to be part of the community. The church is just a building, but it's really what you're doing in the community. And so we tried initially to do some noticeable events around the building, trying to get more attention to the church, and people were thinking the building was closed. Oh, you mean that church is live? Yeah, we're still here. So we were looking at still getting outside the building. In 2007, we had an opportunity to meet with Bishop Story, who was one of the South African bishops that was here for another meeting, and he was associated with friends of our congregation, so we were able to enjoy a dinner and a couple of lunches and talked about how we would use the assets of the church to bring people into the building, to make disciples and make this a realistic, more vibrant congregation. We did a prayer walk around the community. We saw what was actually in the community. The homeless in this area are invisible. And I bet you all of us know somebody, but we don't know they're homeless. You'll see them in the mall, they'll have a bag. And it's a store bag from Macy's or one of the stores, so they look like they belong. They're sitting on a bench, probably spending an hour and a half to drink a $2 Coke or something like that, but they're there, the folks are there. We started an important homeless ministry for us, working with Friday Night and partnering with our folks at what's now Path Forward and with the folks at the food pantry, AFAX in Arlington, to make all of this happen to where we could connect people with services. We were actually getting well outside the building. But as we looked at our deteriorating building, we said, you know, this building doesn't serve our needs anymore. The preschool is not really what it ought to be. The church is falling down around us. Even if we fix the church, we're still going to have an old building. We'll have 1923 plumbing, we'll have 1923 wiring. It's not the church we want it to be. So it was time to do something different. And we began to look at what that might be. We put together some requests for proposal with various developers, and the congregation was beginning to recognize by that time how poorly the building was serving us. And so the congregation supported the activity, the proposals. We took those out with the idea of trying to develop the facility to where it would be debt-free for us, serve our mission requirements, and still meet the needs for worship space. And all of that began to come together until we tried to go for funding. There is where the real rub is, and there is where the real excitement for some of the other speakers today are going to talk about what opportunities are available for you. But as you get down through it, you'll find that at the end, you'll get it done, but it's important to have clarity of purpose through the whole process. You want to have your real objective out in front of the congregation. It's important that you communicate that often, very often, and very clearly and simply. You'll hear people that'll say, yeah, nah, we've done that before, we don't want to do that, I heard about somebody else that's done that. So it takes a while to get everybody comfortable with where you're going. One of the things that helped as we talked about our new building with our congregation is we had a big post-it session. And everybody put what they wanted up for the new building. And they also listed the things that were important to have. And we tried to honor as much of that as we could in putting the whole project together. But I will tell you, you'll have surprises in that. And I'm not going to ask from this group, but I can tell you the group we met with that our church that were present for the posted sessions and what was really required in the new building. The first thing was more bathrooms. I would not have, that would have never been on my list, but you know. As you go through the process, you're going to need alternate plans. You're going to need some ideas as to things that, well, you're going to have a plan B and maybe even a C and D in our case, and expect a lot of surprises. The other thing that is really important, and you're going to hear that from people today, and they're here, you're going to need internal and external partnerships. Even within your church organizations, you will have folks that want to tell you what's best for your location, whether it's how many parking spaces you're going to need, or whether it's how big your sanctuary needs to be. All of those people are intending to help, but they are not necessarily the folks on the ground. And unless you have developed the relationships that allows you to convince those folks, you have a faith-based reason and a discerned-based reason for going where you're going, it's important. We had people on strategic church committees across the conference so that when we were ready to ask for things, people already knew where we'd been, and it was really important. And bring on your technical talent early, your consultants, whether they're real estate or attorneys, those people need to be there as soon as possible.
Thank you. Great technical advice. So let me ask you a couple of questions. So for you, and I'll start with you, Reverend Joe, and maybe do you want to go back to your slides?
Yeah, I'd love to pull up my
possible?
slides if you could. I didn't see them before. There we go.
Yeah,
What
so
are
we
you
can
at?
see the beautiful pictures. Yes. So what was the hardest part of your discernment process for you and your congregation? There were probably multiple, but reflecting upon that, what was the hardest part for you?
Well, I'll tell you the hardest part, and it wasn't very hard, was we actually lost one couple during our year-long discernment process. And we lost that. They were beloved. Every person in our church was beloved, and we couldn't afford to lose anybody. And they moved away to another state shortly thereafter, so we at least consoled ourselves, that they were going to leave anyway. But really, we didn't have any deep problems during our discernment process because we included everybody. We included absolutely everybody in our congregation. Even when it came to our formal votes, we let everybody vote, even if they weren't official members. And of course, then we had to keep 2 sets of books, for our judiciary. And we had a total of 3 formal votes during our whole process. Not during the initial year. We did a go, no-go consensus decision when we found out that we couldn't get both an income stream from our project and a new building because our property was only about 2 acres. So we couldn't build affordable housing on our property, and a new church. So we wanted a new church. Actually, we'd rather have just had the money, but our bishop said no, we had to build a new church. So there's a couple of issues that came up, but they weren't really showstoppers. They didn't break it. And I think the fact that we took the time that we took to do the formal discernment process for the year, I think the fact that lay leaders were leading it, and I think that we had these votes and we let everybody have opinions. They came up with 20 ideas. We explored them all. And basically what happened was the other ideas fell away during the process. And all the other churches that were involved in these kind of projects told us they had a big split in their congregation, and I think it's because those who had a split, I noticed, didn't do that much discernment ahead of time. A long answer to your question. You probably have others.
Nope, I do. But I do want to ask Phil, like from a global perspective for the members in your cohort, what are they struggling with in the discernment phase? What are the challenges, or what were your own church's challenges trying to get to how you're using your real estate assets?
So we just received the grant in July, and so the cohort starts in February. So this kind of next year is the pilot year for 4 years, 48 churches total. But I met with each pastor and leadership team from each church virtually, and I would say the focus for the sermon. In other words, getting to that place where, okay, this is our passion and this is our key idea, and rediscovering the community, as my friend said here, of get to know your community. I think that's a real key part. So, for us as a congregation, we kind of went to it. It went well for us. We were fairly united the whole way. Yeah. So,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jean, how about for you? What was the most difficult part of your discernment?
I think the most difficult part was really deciding how much allocation of space as we built. How much is for the preschool and how much is for the worship area. There are compromises everywhere, which I would not go into. It drives me to distraction. But we tried to keep as much of the old building as possible. The stained glass windows you see all came from the old building, and the congregation definitely wanted those. And the design of that was a challenge. The altar is also from the old building, the baptismal font. So we tried to bring comfort things with us from the previous, and people can still associate with, oh yeah, those are my mother's things that are on the altar table. The table in the narthex, the big wooden block table, used to be in the kitchen, and we had to redesign the legs for it because the people that originally used it were short ladies in the kitchen. And so we put new legs on it. But so there's something almost in every room where folks relate to. We brought the old building with us. It's just not a new building that's sterile.
Wonderful. You did an amazing job, I think, with the old and the new. I want to honor the fact that we have 2 more panels and we're a little behind schedule, so we're going to wrap up this panel. Please reach out to these amazing leaders to talk about their discernment process afterward, and I'll turn it over to Nina. So thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Hello again, Nina Janapa with VREP, Virginia Episcopal Real Estate Partners. I'm really excited to introduce this panel. We've brought here today 2 of the most amazing CEOs in the nonprofit affordable housing world. I know them both well. Camilla McAfee. I'm trying to call you Kamala. Everybody does. And of Wesley Housing, based here in Fairfax, and Carmen Romero, who's the wonderful CEO of True Ground Housing Partners, which is the new name of the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. But also what's exciting about this panel for you is we have 2 rectors here. So we have 2 church leaders that worked with these partners to develop affordable housing. So without further ado, I think this is so rude of me. Julie Wilson-Black, who is the rector of Arlington Presbyterian Church. And you've already met Pastor Sarah here from Central United Methodist Church. So we have this wonderful opportunity for you, both here in the panel, but afterwards in the expo, to learn from their real experience here. So I think our first speaker is Carmen Romero.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. It's great to be back together. As you know, Nina was my mentor, prior CEO at True Ground, and worked on all these projects with me. So Nina, jump in and correct the record if I get something wrong here. A little overview of True Ground. We are based only 3 blocks from here, actually, and we celebrated our 35th anniversary last month. We are housing to over 6,000 individuals. And most of that is in Northern Virginia, but we've now expanded and are doing work in Maryland and cut a ribbon in DC with our first senior affordable development in Ward 4 in just about 60 days. About True Ground, and I would say what distinguishes us from other groups is not only have we gone from just serving the smallest jurisdiction in America, in Arlington County, to becoming a regional player recently, is that I believe we are deeply rooted in not just the bricks and mortar pieces of affordable housing, but the resident services. And I know Camilla and her group at Wesley do feel the same way. So out of our 60 employees, actually over 20 of them are in the services area of True Ground. And that has been life-changing, especially during the pandemic, because keeping people housed in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of incredible inflationary pressures, job loss, as well as dealing with individuals with mental health crises, others who are food insecure. I spend as much of my time worried about kind of the struggles of our residents once they arrive as we do of building the bricks and mortar. You can go forward. And we are very fortunate to, in addition to the 60 people that work at True Ground, we have a 26-person board of directors, 7 committees that those boards and other volunteers bring to the table. So we have just this wealth of support that comes from the community. And that's really important because, frankly, this is very complex, hard work, and having this close set of advisors in addition to the paid staff that really help make projects like this a reality. We could skip the next page, but our leadership team, and I'll be here afterwards and happy to introduce folks to others. But to focus a little on the building you're in now, Unity Homes, which is what we named it from prior, it was called Boston Station, is a faith-based partnership that we were really coming along this very long 17, 18-year journey when the plans had been done, the zoning and the fight with the community to get the entitlements, the table was set. And after the congregation had decided that they were going to part ways with the prior developer and came out with an RFP, Nina and I submitted. We submitted the first time around, just saying, didn't work out, but we really felt a strong passion. This is a church in our backyard that had done all of this work and invested so much in the zoning. For sure, there must be something that could be done to make this financially feasible. And that is really where we spent the lion's share of our time on this project. And it was quite humbling. I mean, we thought we knew how we could get this done, and we had all sorts of plans and guarantees, and the reality is we too failed. When we went to Virginia Housing for tax credits, we restructured it, we competed in an innovation pool. It was the first time that Virginia Housing had that opportunity. But unfortunately, we did not win. And Nina and I walked away from this project, terminated our contract, and said, the prior developer tried twice, we tried once, we have to move on. And then this is where kind of the lesson is about to happen. Every project could fail if you're not taking a precision approach around what is the right moment to actually unlock the potential. And the irony was it was Amazon's arrival into Arlington. In that moment, the state had a bunch of new tools that they were looking to invest in affordable housing. Tools that hadn't existed. So we came back to the congregation and said, will you give us one more try? We think this is that moment. And I'm so grateful they did, and you see before you the fruits of that. I think pretty much everything that we had hoped and dreamed could be possible just emerged. And it's not inexpensive, it's $490,000 per affordable unit. But you were talking about affordability that will last generations. I can tell you the first people that move into a property like this, I'm often here, their first reaction is to close the door to their apartment and they cry because of this is their new home and they know they're gonna stay housed if they walk alongside of us. So with that, I'm gonna pass it back over to you, Nina, or Pastor Sarah, if you'd like to add your reflections.
Thank you. I always have to give credit to I believe it was the APC groundbreaking, or was it the ribbon cutting? I think it was one of those events that you were there.
It was APC.
And Reverend David Bowers from Enterprise was talking about their project and how when there was no way forward, God made a way. And that really touched Carmen's heart. And that's what I give credit to them coming back and saying, we want to give it one more try. And so I appreciate that. As Jean mentioned earlier, we had to really choose what to focus on in our building. The Post-its had a lot more than just more bathrooms. There were a lot of great creative ministry ideas, but our architect told us that we had a very ambitious program, which means trying to put 20 pounds of potato in a 10-pound sack. So we really had to focus, and that meant our congregation got clear on our mission, which was to support affordable housing, to feed hungry people, and to support early childhood education. So that was why we did choose to commit a significant portion of our physical footprint to Kinhaven School. It started as a Mother's Day Out program of the church, and then eventually grew into its own 501c3. So we have a fair amount of space for children as young as 6 weeks, and during the year, children under 5 are going to be part of the program, and then in the summers, they'll go up to age 12. We are still going through the administration of getting all the licenses needed, so they're not up and running yet, which means that you can actually see the spaces today because there aren't kids in the classroom right now. We've also partnered with APA to make sure that we have 16 spaces set aside for APA residents who have the child care subsidy through Virginia, to make sure that folks who need to have good quality child care can potentially have it in the building they live in, or the one that's 3 blocks away, or another one that's close by across from the Ballston Metro. We also had the commitment to our feeding program. Jean mentioned that happened on Friday mornings. It served up to 150 people every week, and we wanted to have a space that could continue to serve whatever version of that program would exist. When we started our Friday morning breakfast, the Homeless Services Center wasn't open at that time. It opened over the years, and now they have opportunity to serve a hot breakfast there as well. So the need has evolved over time. But what that means for us now in our new building is that we've partnered with another United Methodist community, the Provision Church, and they run a community cafe on Wednesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 3, welcoming all who want to come to have a good meal and also to connect with the community. So we are seeing that space blossom in a way that we had always dreamed of, and we didn't know quite what it would look like, but we're excited to see what God is doing. And of course, affordable housing. There's 144 units above us. They range from 30% to 60% of AMI, and it is absolutely incredible because for so many years, we were clear on our vision. We had guests who would come to Friday morning breakfast who had slept on the street. Then they got connected to A-SPAN, now Path Forward, but then they needed housing. And so we helped to create housing with the hopes that one day someone would come and live in that apartment. And about 2 months ago, we had a visitor come to worship and tell us, I used to come to your Friday morning breakfast, and now I live upstairs. And I said, you're the man we built this building for. Thank you for coming to worship. And he's come ever since, and he even helped last week. We've been putting together welcome baskets for the residents, and he helped me carry some of them over to the neighbors. So it has been a joy to see these relationships continue to evolve and blossom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Camilla McAfee, President and CEO at Wesley Housing. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Lakeisha, for inviting us to this conversation. That's a beautiful story, and that's definitely what it's all about. Wesley, for those of you that do not know, is a 50-year-old nonprofit affordable housing developer that's born out of the United Methodist social justice missions, long-standing policy about serving the community, and I think that certainly is the biggest piece that we have benefited from in partnership with the Arlington Presbyterian Church, which is a project I'm going to talk to you mainly about today. Go to the next slide. The Waypoint at Fairlington was an opportunity that was presented, not indifferent from some of these other opportunities. I think Jill had mentioned that she had been a consultant to many churches. I think Waypoint was, Fairlington Presbyterian, was one of them. And they had put out an RFP to find a development partner, a partner that we, as we had discussed, is a long-term partner, because beyond the challenges that we have in putting together the entitlements and the financing to get the project built, it is a long-term opportunity once the project is up and operational to be in community with your neighbor. It's one of the few times that you get to select your neighbor, right? And so finding the right partner is really important as we've been discussing. And we're just so happy that Fairlington saw enough in Wesley and in that partnership to be able to select us to develop 81 units of affordable housing adjacent to their site. This is a prior picture of the parking lot, and I'll let Pastor Julie talk a little bit more about her vision for that parking lot, but it's the parking lot on which we built these homes in the community. We talked a little bit about the cost. It's not a cheap venture. It's not without its time constraints. We went through a significant entitlement process and engagement with the community, and it's always interesting when we develop properties on faith-based land as well as public institutional land, that the neighbors are used to seeing that be in its current condition, and they expect, because of who owns it, for it to be in that condition for perpetuity. But it's always an interesting process to walk them through a vision for a new day. Changes that will enhance not only their personal experience, hopefully, but also be able to open that up for experiences of new neighbors. And so again, that neighborly way, happy that the church chose Wesley to be an owner and landlord next to them on this site. Next slide, please. So again, 81 units of housing at various levels of affordability. This is very typical of the affordable housing that we all provide. We do want to serve not only those whom are at what we call 60% of the area median income, which is really a restriction that's typical of the federal program that we operate under. But we also want to serve people at the lowest income levels, which is 0 to 30% of the area median income. And oftentimes, in order to serve those residents, we're often trying to tap into operating subsidies that we were happy to be able to secure in partnership with the City of Alexandria in this case. We have 9 units that are also subsidized from a rental subsidy program that the city runs. In addition, I talked about those sources. In addition to those federal resources, those state resources, the city also provides significant capital for this as well. Next slide, please. So featuring Waypoint, but did want to touch on our partnership with the Virginia Diocesan organization in St. Paul's on the Hill Episcopalian Church in Frederick County, Virginia. Another project done in partnership with the church. In this case, we walked through the entitlements, we walked through the financing. We had full intentions and design to be able to build back a smaller, more efficient facility for the church, but they opted not to rebuild at that time and redirect resources elsewhere. That's oftentimes the case. But if you can go to the next slide, I believe I do have the finished product of the affordable housing. This is 63 units of affordable senior housing. Again, very similar stack in terms of affordability levels, in terms of amenities, certainly those services that we talked about in providing services for our residents. Depending on who we're serving, we modify the breadth of those in order to meet their needs. and we're happy to be able to provide opportunities for our older adults to be able to get out and engage with one another more often and be in community with one another. I believe that's the end of my slides and presentations. I'm available to be in fellowship with you all after for just a few. I do have to leave a little bit early for daycare pickup. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla. So I'll tell a little bit of our story from the church's perspective, how the Waypoint at Fairlington came to be. Our discernment process started around 2016, and you can see from the aerial view here that we felt called to retain our existing church building rather than tearing it down. And so the property that we sold to Wesley Housing to build on was the parking lot behind the church. And then as part of our redevelopment, Wesley Housing built new surface parking spaces for the church in addition to underground parking for residents of the Waypoint. So you can go to the next slide. This was our groundbreaking, which was during the pandemic, because everybody has masks on. There's a couple people in this room who are in that picture, if you can see yourselves. But you can see this is behind the church where they were breaking ground. And our goals in this project were not only to serve our neighbors and address the shortage of affordable housing, but also to make our existing facility more accessible. And so we added an addition onto our building with an elevator that connects all 3 floors of our building. We made the building, we created accessible entryways, accessible restrooms, and so forth. And we also were able, because we didn't tear down our existing building, to walk away with a couple $1 million in the bank, which will help us sustain our ministry and the building over time. Our building was built in 1940, well, in the late 1940s, so it is an aging building that does need maintenance. So this was the ribbon cutting, which was in 2022, and as we look at this, it seems like, well, this is a really happy ending, win-win for all. But getting up to this point, I do want to confess to you that I was shocked by the amount of NIMBYism in our community. You can imagine, folks who we always had a friendly relationship with before in the neighborhood, all of a sudden were very suspicious of our motives and what were we doing. We came out of church one Sunday and there were flyers on every car in the parking lot telling people in the congregation to vote against this proposal. And there was a lot of disinformation going around the myth that property values go down when affordable housing comes in. So we did wonder, where is this coming from? Why is there this level of vitriol? And not even from people in the immediate vicinity of the church, but like a couple of miles away in the city of Alexandria. So if you can go to this is our congregation on the day of the dedication of the new renovations. The next slide. We, in 2020, in the wake of the death of George Floyd, we established a racial justice discernment group, and we had already started this process of redevelopment, but we went back and looked at the church's history, and a lot of things started to fall into place for us. So we discovered that this land that our church was on was formerly owned by Cassius Lee, the cousin of Robert E. Lee. It was, the whole property around the church was called Minokan Farm. The church is on Minokan Avenue in Alexandria, on King Street and Minokan Avenue on the west end. And this property was entirely owned by the Lee family. And then later on, it was the parcels were divided. Next slide. And the parcel that the church bought in 1947 came with a deed with a restrictive covenant in it. And the deed, you can't quite make it out here, but the deed says that this land shall never be owned, leased, or occupied by anyone other than a member of the Caucasian race. And our church's founders signed this. Now, in 1948, the Supreme Court struck down these restrictive covenants, so it was never enforceable. But of course, everybody who bought land around our church also signed these deeds at one time or another in their history. And so we started to this started to make a little more sense why there was this expectation among our neighbors that they somehow got to control who would live in the neighborhood. And you know, the effects of this restrictive covenant is that for many generations, there were no people of color in our neighborhood. We had access to this property because we were a white congregation, and the founders of our church benefited from this system that gave them access to this property. So becoming aware of this deed led me to think that maybe God had another purpose in leading us to work with Wesley Housing to develop the Waypoint, besides just, you know, making our church more accessible. That maybe God's purpose was about changing us as a congregation and changing how we thought of ourselves and how we thought of what we were doing. So it wasn't just about doing something nice for our neighbors or doing something good for the community, but it was about making amends for past injustice that our congregation had been complicit in. So this project was a way of making amends by giving access to people of color to live in this neighborhood, in the Fairlington neighborhood. 85% of Waypoint residents are people of color. So I just wanted to share that as part of our story. And this last slide is just a little shout out for the legislation that we heard about earlier that'll allow all congregations in Virginia to have an easier road to developing affordable housing, which you can learn more about at the expo.
Well, this is just an amazing panel, and I would love to ask questions. Let me just ask one quick popcorn question. You just heard these different stories, right? Sale of partial of a parking lot and keep some cash. And Pastor Sarah, you were kind of on the other extreme, right? You, in addition to selling your land, you did a capital campaign. Do you want to talk just a little bit about your sources for your project?
I'd be glad to, but I will say we didn't sell the land. We have a unique model in that we still own the dirt under the parking lot, and we have a 99-year land lease. Mm-hmm. So the land lease meant that the church did get a payment for that. That immediately went into escrow in order to build the portion of the building that we're in now. Within this 8-story building, there are multiple commercial condominium units. We're in land unit C, which is convenient because it's the church space. APA owns land unit A. So that's, well, now you're True Ground. That doesn't work anymore. That worked 2 months ago. And so what we did in 2017, when we were seeking funding for our vision, we wanted to have our dream become reality. And we believed that God had given us this dream. So we invited the congregation to make a significant financial contribution to the Dreams to Reality campaign. And that allowed us to actually be able to contribute $4 million to the project. So we did not, unfortunately, walk away with a lot of money in the bank, but we believed enough in the vision that in order to help get all of the budgets to balance, we were able to contribute $4 million as one of the sources for the project.
Great. And one last question. Camilla, you talked about working in Winchester, as well as we heard from Helen McIlvaine, 5 projects, lots of support from the city of Alexandria. I know we've got some people here not from Alexandria or Arlington. How was the reception different working in a different community?
Housing for older adults is usually a better lead-in. Let me just put it that simply. Yeah, it was a challenge, but we were able to get through the entitlement process. The relationships that the church had in the community were strong, and I think, again, existing entitlement zoning ordinances for housing for older adults, and with the idea that that would be the primary residency there, really helped that.
That helped, yeah. Well, anyway, wonderful panel, great talent here. Come talk to them in the expo. And I want to call up our final panel on operations. Pastor Ashley Goff, Michael Spotts, and Kat Turner from the VREP board.
I have double duty as moderator and a presenter, so let me introduce the other panelists. First, we have Ashley Goff, who is a member of the United Church of Christ and a graduate of Union Theological Seminary and has been at the Arlington Presbyterian Church since 2018 as their pastor. And she's going to talk about that church and Gilliam Place. Michael Spotts is the Director of Real Estate at Habitat for Humanity in DC and Northern Virginia and has a background in housing and community development experience with Neighborhood Fundamentals, Urban Land Institute, and Enterprise Community Partners. I'm Kat Turner, and you need to know 4 things about me. I'm on the VREP board, so I believe in what we're doing and talking about today. I'm a member of Joe Belzer's congregation at Church of the Resurrection, so I have been through this. The third thing is I can't think on my feet. I'm a scripted person, so I'll be reading to you. And the fourth thing is I like to tell my stories with pictures. So a month from now, when you look at my PowerPoint, you're going to think, what was the story that went with this picture? The title slide, the first slide then. After a year of discernment and several years of preparation, 96% of Resurrection's congregation voted to replace our existing church with a new, smaller church, next, and build the Spire, an affordable housing building on our property. While our spirit and energy for this transformative project was high, it was not without sacrifices. Next. We would be a church without a building for 29 months of construction, cobbling together venues for worship, formation, and fellowship. Next. We had 3 tenant congregations that contributed 25% of our operating budget that had to find new places to worship. Next. Our award-winning preschool that had served children with differing physical and mental abilities for 40 years had to find a new home. Next. Our on-site food pantry was relocated to a building owned by a nearby church. Important community outreach projects like Alexandria's monthly food distribution program and a chapter of AA were displaced. All of these programs and activities were significant in our identity as Resurrection, as an important part of Alexandria's community in the West End. Next, once construction was completed, which of these activities returned? Next. Other than our own congregational worship, none of them returned to our building, which you might have expected with the church going from 12,500 square feet to 5,000 square feet. With fewer parking places, we now have 3 Sunday worship services rather than 2 to accommodate our congregation. Resurrection's new church building had to be accompanied by a new sense of mission, ministry, and identity to go with the strong sense of pride about what we have accomplished together. We found that our 4 decades of collaboration and cooperation with an adjacent faith-based retirement community had been seriously disrupted by that organization's opposition to our redevelopment plan and by the construction period. Next. When we moved back to our new church, we recognized that we wanted to work on reestablishing our relationship with our old neighbors and welcoming the new residents. So one of our first vestry goals was to establish a sense of community among the populations that share the hill on which we are relocated. What have we done operationally to revitalize or begin new relations? Next. The Memorial Garden, which sits on land owned by Resurrection and the senior living facility, had been fenced off for nearly 3 years of construction and was sadly overgrown. However, it provided a perfect opportunity for collaboration. Next. Resurrection members, along with residents from next door, have worked together to restore the garden to a place of beauty and quiet contemplation. Funds have been provided by both organizations for the removal of dead trees and new hardscaping to make more parts of the garden accessible. The garden has allowed those with an interest in creation care to add native plants and pollinators, and the garden now hopes to be named a certified wildlife habitat from the Audubon Society. Next, we have found new ministries, and we have new members joining us who have heard about what we have done and want to be part of a church that seeks creative and innovative ways to do God's work. Next, Resurrection has reached out to its neighbors in the Spire. We had been warned by others not to expect any residents in the affordable housing building to join our congregation, and I am happy to report that our experience has been different, and one of the residents from the Spire now serves on our vestry. Next, we have been most successful in reaching out to the children at the Spire. On the last day of school, we meet the buses with popsicles, we do arts and crafts programs. Holidays are marked with Easter egg rolls, Christmas Eve hot chocolate, and Halloween treats. These activities for the children are now finding supporters in the retirement building, drawing all three of our communities together. Next, the Spire opened in mid-2021 during the pandemic, and much of the immediate resident services attention at the building was dedicated to securing rental assistance services. Consequently, our efforts to engage the adults have developed more slowly. Next, but we now have an English for speakers of other languages program that meets 3 classes that meets twice a week with participants from Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. Next, Resurrection is not the same church that it was 10 years ago, but it is a vital, thriving church seeking new ways to live into our mission. We knew that the project would transform our physical assets. We just didn't realize how much it would transform us spiritually as well. Ashley, would you like to tell us about your church?
Sure, I got this up. So I'm Ashley Goff. I'm the pastor at Arlington Presbyterian Church, and this is what it used to look like before 2016 when the congregation sold the land it was on and the building to True Ground Housing, then Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. Nina and Carmen both walked the congregation through they were part of the discernment process. It was a long and lengthy one. I'm on the now part of the story, so that's another story. But this is what it looked like. Next slide. That's what it looked like when you demolish a building. So the congregation was called, this was a real call for them, to do something very dramatic, kind of above their size, really. They scaled up to do something dramatic and big for the sake of their neighbors, right? So part of the call came out of listening to neighbors, going out on Columbia Pike, riding the buses, having food, everything. And the common denominator in the story was, I can't afford to live and work in Arlington County, and I want to do both. So those stories drove the call, along with a lot of other things, but that was at the heart of the call, because they'll say those stories broke their heart. So they broke the building. So they sold everything to True Ground. Next slide. So this is us now. So where there were 0 homes, there are now 173 homes on this land. And we are located now on the entry level of Gilliam Place with about 3,000 square feet. We rent our space. We wanted to be like everyone else in the building. We are also with subsidized rent. Thank you, Carmen. So the congregation did not want to own interior space anymore. They wanted to have that kind of nimbleism that comes with renting, at least from their perspective, that they didn't have that the entitlement that comes with ownership. So what are we doing now? So, I mean, I'll just say it is just a delight. It is just a delight for us to be together at Arlington Presbyterian Church in Gilliam Place, and to be on the entry level in a space that we created for us, how we see God now, how we see community now. I'm living the clergy dream, but it is just a delight to be in the building in South Arlington, the most representational zip code of the county, 22204. Because we see ourselves, and I'm using a phrase from Carmen, as an ecosystem, right? We are in this building together. So there's also another nonprofit in the building called Kitchen of Purpose, that they have about 5,000 square feet. They do social entrepreneurial work with Spanish-speaking immigrant veterans around culinary skills. So we're kind of in this world together, and all of us are trying to create an alternative economy, an alternative community, an alternative home for about 350 people, right? That's about how many people are in Gilliam Place. So as others have talked about, the transformation of a congregation, that's us too, right? So when you literally demolish your building for the sake of your neighbor, you demolish a lot of stuff, right? You demolish the history that you do not need to carry forward. You demolish a lot of power structures that need to go. And you get to redefine yourselves in a very, very new and imaginative way. So if someone's hurting in the building, we're all hurting in the building. If someone's rejoicing in the building, we're all rejoicing in the building, right? So we're in this together. So we now have 6 core values that we've created since we have got into Gilliam Place. Place-based, communal, relational, prayerful, transformational, and justice-focused. And these core values determine how we use our space, how we use our money, how we see relationships, how we evaluate our time with each other. So what we're really trying to do is indeed build this alternative community with no trappings of the past really anymore. So we're trying to upend, the transactional ways of of being a neighbor, right? That we have everything and we need to help other people. It's like solidarity or bust at this point for us in the building. So several things that we've done. Carmen came to us a couple years ago when the pandemic benefits were ending because the fear, I'll speak. The fear of people getting evicted, right? And I asked, long story short, we ended up giving True Ground $200,000 to create basically a clinic to free people from that indebtedness of rent relief. So in one day, True Ground worked with Arlington's Department of Human Services and a nonprofit called Arlington Thrive, and 80 families walked away with their debt released, basically. So Carmen came back to us a couple months later. Thank you, Carmen, and asked for another $200,000, which we ended up discerning and giving, to create a program called EASE, which we are buying down basically 30 apartments in the building for, I think it's 2 years. We're basically knocking $250 off a month for 30 households. So this is literally to bring ease. So there's a cohort, and I get to go to the meetings, and there's this little community that's being built within Gilliam Place within this program. We have music lessons that we've raised money for, so 25 people in the building once a week get free 30-minute music lessons, guitar, piano, percussion. And so that's an equity issue. How do you give people access to something they would not otherwise have, right? We have Arlington Food Bank that comes on site on Mondays from 4 to 5:30, and that turns into this little whirlwind of 80 people coming down to get free, nutritious, supplemental food. But clothes end up getting put out for free. The NAACP comes for voter registration. So it turns into this little world. And I do imagine that if the worst case scenario happens in the election, that we still have this little world that we have each other. And one of my favorite things, and this is the last thing, is my love of just kind of bumping up with people. Last week I had numerous people from the building come into the church, into my office. The stress is very high. And so that ability to have those relationships, to go get the mail and come out 30 minutes later, to go to my car and try and have relationships in the parking lot, have conversations in the parking lot. So the sense of community that we're trying to build in this faith-based way, and how do we change the narrative about an affordable housing apartment building in a community where traditionally it's seen as it takes, right? It takes something from the neighborhood, from those people who are like, I was here first. They take poor people take parking spots, they take spots in schools, they take that spot of sky that I've always looked at outside my window. And this building is a gift, and it is an asset to the neighborhood, and it's our job to change the narrative about what it means to have an affordable housing apartment building in a neighborhood.
As a fellow 22204 resident, I can attest to the positive impact that building has had on the community and the community that they've created. Incidentally, the kitchen incubator that you talk about was at one point home to one of the best fried chicken sandwiches I've ever had, and that business has grown out of the incubator space and is now has its own standalone restaurant space along National Landing. So it shows sort of like the spillover impacts of the work that the congregation has done in that space. I'm Mike Spotts. I'm with Habitat for Humanity of DC and Northern Virginia. I'm going to read from my notes as well. I'd like to say it's because it was an effort to help the translation services, but since I'm in a house of worship, I'm compelled to, by conscience, to be clear that it's also partially so that I stay on time. So with that being said, go to the next slide, please. Habitat DC and Northern Virginia, we're the local affiliate of Habitat for Humanity International. We are a little different than some of the other developers that have been on this stage, in that we work to support affordable home ownership for low and moderate income households. Our affiliate, which is born of a merger of the separate DC and Northern Virginia affiliates a couple of years ago, has built over 300 homes across the region and completed more than 200 repairs. And we have about 53 additional units in our pipeline of affordable home ownership and other projects as well, which I'll touch on in a second. Next slide, please. So we view faith-based partnerships as an opportunity for achieving multiple goals and mutual goals. Like everyone else that you've heard speak, we're not looking to explore a market niche. This isn't really just about real estate development. What we're looking to do is to provide our capacity and expertise in situations where a faith community is either facing a real estate challenge that it needs to solve, or is hearing a calling toward addressing the region's housing cases. And in many cases, it's a combination of both. So this can be done by direct real estate activities. However, since this is an operations panel, while I'll touch on those development activities, I'll also be highlighting other approaches that align with the ongoing activities of the broader faith community in the region, namely around fundraising and volunteerism. And this will touch on some of our affiliates' direct work, but also I'll be expanding and talking about some of the other work that I've observed or that with groups that we've partnered with throughout the region that we can't necessarily claim credit for, but I believe are worth raising up. Next slide, please. So it's important to emphasize that real estate development can take many forms, and for a variety of reasons, many of which have to do with the funding structures for affordable housing in the region. Our developments are traditionally small or mid-scale, much smaller than the types of projects you've seen so far, and they range from about 1 to 20 units. So faith communities that may not have the same scale of land assets that align with some of the larger opportunities that we've heard talked about today can still partner if they want to work to create affordable housing through their partnerships. We've also consulted and partnered with faith communities on how they can better utilize their existing real estate assets. You know, it's not always the church building that the faith institution owns. may hold an old rectory that is no longer being utilized, or have come into ownership of other homes or buildings for other reasons over the years. So we can help consult with those congregations to see how they can best operate and maintain those, or potentially redevelop those assets if that is their preferred approach. And finally, we take an expansive view of faith-based development that extends beyond the houses of worship themselves and includes the ecosystem of faith-based and or denomination-affiliated nonprofits that work to meet social service goals. So it's not just churches, it's not just houses of worship, but it is those nonprofits that are out there on the street, so to speak, that are working to address these social challenges directly that we've engaged with in the past. And so I'll talk a couple about some of our ongoing real estate development partnerships that illustrate those points. We're currently working with the Fairfax Presbyterian Church to build the Glebe townhomes. We've had our ceremonial groundbreaking, but we haven't actually officially started the real construction work yet. And that project will produce 10 units of affordable housing on a portion of the church's parking lot. This is another example where the church wanted to keep their existing church and other structures. They also host a daycare on site. So those buildings are all to remain. We're just utilizing an underutilized part of their land, which is their parking lot. And 8 of those units will be part of our traditional affordable homeownership program. 2 will be sold to a nonprofit called Homestretch, which is represented here today. Barfont, if you can wave your hand and say hi. And they are a great nonprofit that provides transitional housing for families that have experienced homelessness. And I'll touch more on that partnership in a future slide. But we're truly providing a different type of mixed income housing as part of this project. Next slide, please. Another example of a faith-based partnership is our Rees Farmhouse redevelopment in Arlington County in the Boulevard Manor neighborhood, which at the completion of this project, which has started construction recently, will become a group home for adults with intellectual and physical disabilities. The construction of this project and the renovation of the existing farmhouse is supported by another nonprofit, Home Aid of the National Capital Region. This is a little different than some of the other examples you've seen in today's session, since it's this historically designated 19th century farmhouse was owned by Arlington County and not a house of worship. However, there are a couple reasons that I highlight this example here today. First, we know that maintaining buildings and homes in a state of good repair can be difficult and costly. This is particularly acute when the owner, be it a government or a faith-based institution, is not in the direct business of property management or real estate activities. With Reeves, we are part of a team that helped the county determine the best viable mission-oriented use of this existing asset, and we've been able to take on the responsibility for ongoing operations and management of the site from the county through this partnership by us during the construction process, and by another partner, which I'll mention shortly, during the ongoing operations phase. This approach is viable regardless of the property owner, and we've had houses of worship reach out to us to pick our brains about this type of partnership, and those conversations are ongoing. Another relevant aspect is the post-renovation partnership that I just referenced. Our 4th major partner in this project is L'Arche of Greater Washington. It's a faith-based nonprofit that owns, operates, and provides wraparound services at their group homes throughout the region, with a focus on providing a family-oriented, inclusive, caring, and importantly, integrated home for the underserved community of adults with intellectual disabilities. So it's another example of a faith-based institution, be it a nonprofit, though not a congregation itself, which provides an opportunity for partnership. And there are numerous organizations like L'Arche throughout the region that serve a range of mission goals. So whatever your congregation's passion and calling is for, there's a group out there that's working to solve that and could be a partner in a sort of faith-based development opportunity. We go to the next slide, please. So while all of these real estate development opportunities are exciting, many congregations may have an interest in supporting housing, but not the land or the interest in directly engaging in development. There are several ways that these congregations can pursue that interest. Circling back to the Glebe-View Townhomes development and back to Homestretch, Homestretch has a Sacred Homes program in which it partners with specific faith communities on a fundraising campaign to build or purchase a home for their mission. So in this example, the Glebe Homes at Fairfax Presbyterian Church, in addition to providing the land, the church has also participated in the Sacred Homes campaign and has raised over $500,000 to support the creation of one of those 2 homes that will be built on that site. Similarly, separate from the Homestretch Sacred Homes program, Habitat provides opportunities to sponsor individual homes in our real estate developments that is often can be through partnerships with other institutions, be it philanthropy, corporations, or faith-based communities. And you go to the last slide, please. And then my final example is related to volunteerism and engagement, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Rachel that's in the crowd, who is leads our volunteer services. In my experience, some of the most active, engaged, and vibrant faith communities I've interacted with have been the ones that have proactively organized activities for community service and fellowship beyond just their worship services. Whether it's some of the charitable work that's been referenced during all these panels, or the church that I grew up in a community of Eastern European immigrants, where the grandmothers would make pierogies every Sunday afternoon after church, and then sell them as a fundraiser for the church. And when those types of activities are going on, those are when the churches that I've been affiliated with have always been at their healthiest. And so Habitat DC Nova provides many volunteering opportunities in which our regional faith partners are actively engaged. First, there are opportunities to actually help us build the homes through our volunteer build days. Other construction-oriented nonprofits, such as Rebuilding Together, have similar opportunities. We even have a group of regular volunteers in Northern Virginia that we refer to as the Sandlot, who go beyond one-off builds and help us organize and lead volunteer groups. And many of those members of our Sandlot come from the region's faith communities. Our faith-based partners, both individuals and institutions, have also served as ambassadors, educating their peers on the cause of affordable housing. Glebe-View is supported not just by the Fairfax Presbyterian Church, but several other Presbyterian congregations throughout the region that were recruited to the cause by the active members of that congregation. And finally, in expanding beyond just Habitat DC Nova's remit to that of other great nonprofits in the region and other institutions, our region has benefited from the community engagement and advocacy led by Voice, Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement, who I see some representatives of in the room as well. In Arlington, where, as I mentioned earlier, that I live, they've been involved in almost all of the most important and sometimes contentious housing policy discussions, speaking to their congregations, building support, and directly organizing advocacy for affordable housing among the faith community. So with that, in the interest of time, I'll conclude my presentation and look forward to the rest of the session.
We're a little behind time, but I'll have one question for Ashley. You've talked about your experience being a delight for a pastor. What would your congregants say about their experience now?
It's a delight, too.
Uniformly?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Nina?
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists and presenters. And to echo Pastor Guff, I would just like to say that this afternoon has been a delight. Hi, I'm Sheila Hurley-Hennessy. I am the Faith Organizing Director with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. Shout out to Dr. Cook in the back and her welcome. We were delighted to co-sponsor this event with VREP and want to thank you all for attending. Thank all of our panelists and presenters for sharing their story, their wisdom, and their just incredible witness with all of us. All of our presenters will be available to some extent in the expo hall. And additionally, because of the grant supporting this event from Virginia Housing, we also have a gift for all the congregations participating. So this book, Gone for Good, is a compilation of stories and essays going into the coming wave of church property transformation. Now, we know that this is not just churches. We are trying to open this flexibility to all faith communities, but this book includes a chapter by Reverend Ashley Goff and a lot of other stories from around the country. Additionally, there's about 30 congregations around Virginia who've done some kind of pursuit of affordable housing on their land. So we have another little draft booklet that I've worked on at the Virginia Interfaith Table, focusing on, in Virginia, how have congregations lived their mission in this way. Feel free to come check it out. Chat with all of our presenters in the expo, and many, many thanks again for attending. Don't forget to swing by and pick up Gone for Good. One last thing, thank you for willingly putting on your name tags. Please do wear them for the expo, but we have a little basket for you to drop them off in before you leave so we can reuse the plastic. And I will let Pastor Sarah talk about tours.
So if anyone's interested in the tour of the building, we'll do 2 of them, one for those who want to get the tour right away and one for those who want to go to the expo first. So if you want the tour right away, I'll ask Gene to come forward. You've seen Gene Cross, you know what he looks like. He'll start the tour up in this area, and he's going to be joined by Kathy Seibert, who's a member of the church. And then when they get back from the first round of tours, we'll make an announcement in the fellowship hall for anyone who would like to go. That was the only thing I had. Thank you. So enjoy. Have a good evening.